Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another Postdoc Career Talk webinar. My name is Lorena Areal. I am the current president of FAU's Postdoc Association, and I'm going to be your host for this webinar. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Amanda Maple. So Dr. Maple has earned her Ph.D. from Arizona State University in 2013. And during her graduate studies and her postdoc, she has focused her research on mechanisms underlying psychiatric diseases, including schizophrenia. So during this time in academia, she has received some prestigious training awards, and she has published impactful research papers. But then she transitioned this passion for schizophrenia research into her current role as a medical science liaison at Alkermes, which is a pharmaceutical company focused on the treatment for mental illness. So welcome, Amanda. It is a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Great. Well, thank you, Lorena. Thank you all for joining me today. I am super excited to be here. I also want to thank the whole team at the FAU Office for Postdoctoral Studies. First of all, this has been a much needed distraction from the whole world going on right now. So it's been great to focus on this and to kind of think about this. And also, what a great opportunity for all of you postdocs out there, graduate students. I remember when Lorena first told me about this, I was super jealous. I was like, oh, I wish we had that when I was in postdocs. I could have really done some really good information. And then also in preparing this talk, I've gone back and listened to your other speakers and just, wow, like what a great resource. I found myself taking notes. I was like, oh, I should have thought of that. So I'm super honored to be here today and to share some information with you and generate some questions and discussions, anything I can do to help. So getting started, the title of my talk here is On the Road Again, and I am a Willie Nelson song. I do enjoy his music, but I think this really spoke to kind of my transition through academia. A lot of you have been on a lot of roads, gone to a lot of different places. And then it also is a nice transition over to kind of my current role now as a medical science liaison. A lot of travel, a lot of roads, and a lot of airplanes. So you're going to see a lot of road analogies. I think I managed to work it into every slide, so you'll probably be sick of it by the end. But I think it's a really good analogy for where I've been, where I am, and probably where we're going. And so this is just a disclaimer. Maybe I've been in industry for a little too long now. It's been about 3 years. But this is just my personal journey. So I don't want anyone to feel discouraged if you don't see yourself in this. There's so many roads to get to industry, to get to an MSL position. There's about 30 people right now on our team, and I bet you if I asked everyone, everyone's path was somewhat different. So really just take what you need from this talk. I hope you find maybe some tricks of the trade, maybe some ideas just to step back and kind of look at your whole journey through academia and where you can go with it. And over here on the right, I am a deadhead, and so I always just like it. There's just so many roads to get to where you're going. So just kind of think of that as you're kind of listening to this talk and some nice distraction for your Wednesday afternoon. So today's roadmap, what this going to look like, we're going to start off I'm going to talk about my background, my research, and my professional. And then I'm going to focus in on my time and my transition during and coming out of my postdoctoral training. I think that might be the most beneficial information for this audience. Next, I'm going to kind of transition into what is industry. And I have quotes up there because industry is just so big. It seemed like such a big black hole when I was in my postdoc. So I want to give some light into that black hole. Specifically, what is a medical science liaison, the role, what is medical affairs? That's kind of the department in which I'm housed at Alkermes. And then kind of a very high level overview of a medical affairs company. And then finally, tips for the road ahead. So we'll take a little break and kind of give you kind of what information I've gleaned. So over here on the right, we have this comic, which I'm sure you're all are following. If you're not, you need to get it because it relates so well to postdoc life and graduate school life. And here it's kind of saying the post-hoc versus the postdoc. So the post-hoc fallacy is to incorrectly assume that A is the cause of B just because A precedes B. So for example, all professors have PhDs. Therefore, getting a PhD means you get a professor job, right? I think I was definitely in that boat all through my graduate school. I was like, getting a PhD, I'm going to get a job, and I had it figured out. However, we all know that correlation does not equal causation. We drill that into research methods classes. And so it kind of leads it over to the right-hand side, the postdoc fallacy, to incorrectly assume that you'll have a job just because you have a PhD. And now what? And so you can kind of see that stressed out look in that comic's face. And that was definitely me probably about 3 years ago. You could change the hair and shave off the goatee, but I was definitely in that space of anxiety. And so I just wanted you to know that if you're in that space or you're getting near that space, there is hope. There's kind of light at the end of the tunnel, and it'll all work out because you have a PhD, because you've acquired so many skills. And we'll kind of review those going forward. So this is just kind of the roads across America, kind of a nice way to demonstrate kind of my background, where I've been. So this is kind of showing my academic journey. So I'm from a very small town in rural West Virginia. We have 3 stoplights. It's also home of the world's largest teapot. So after COVID, if you need a vacation, I can give you some recommendations on one of the 2 hotels we have in town, but it's a beautiful country. But I started my research in undergraduate, actually at a small liberal arts school. I was lucky enough to get a summer internship working in a lab at Bowling Green. And I started looking at the brains and looking at histology. So looking at brain tissue of pigeons and rats, and mainly looking for navigational brain areas, some very basic things, but it really started my love of neuroscience. I also had a great uncle that had Parkinson's disease. And so at the time back then, we were just starting to learn so much more about the brain-body connection and how it could affect different psychiatric and motor illnesses. After I graduated, I still was kind of lost about what I wanted to do, but I got really lucky and got an opportunity down at East Tennessee State University for a master's degree in experimental psychology. All my degrees are in psychology. And so when I was down at ETSU down in Tennessee, I started working with a neonatal rodent model schizophrenia. So in short form, what we did was we took neonatal rats and we gave them a drug, a dopamine agonist, and then we raised them up to adulthood, and they had a lot of the phenotypes of schizophrenia. So we were able to do different kind of behavioral testing, and then we actually worked with some drug companies. I realizing now it was very beneficial, but back in the day, I was just happy to do some experiments. So I learned quite a lot in that time, graduated my master's, but at the time I was still kind of always debating this research versus clinical experience. I missed talking to people, not being at a bench, kind of being out there. So I actually took a job at youth villages. I was actually a social worker, family counselor. And I think that also happened was I was kind of sick of living the graduate student life. At that time, pay was very poor, and I was actually bartending at night just to make rent. So it was nice to have a job. I did that for about a year, but I kept missing research. I still had so many questions, and my passion for schizophrenia, I knew I wanted to continue on with research. So I actually went back and got my Ph.D. And so I started sending out applications. Funny enough, I did apply to FAU and got accepted down at the psychology department when I was applying for my PhD. So I might have been in Florida a little earlier, but I decided to go to the desert, and I went out to Arizona State University. And there I was again doing preclinical rodent models of schizophrenia, this time looking at some different pharmacological techniques, and graduated from there. And this may be where some of you are in the boat. Maybe you're a graduate student thinking about postdoc. I didn't think much about my postdoc. I was just continuing that road and into academia. And I was really lucky that one of my committee members was Amelia Gaetano. So she was an MD, PhD, working with patients with schizophrenia, working in a mouse model, a knockout model. And I asked her if she had room for me, and she did. And so I just kind of moved next door to the College of Medicine, the University of Arizona College of Medicine in Phoenix, and I started my postdoctoral career there. And then you can see here, I have the All of Us program. I was actually a clinical research manager after I left my postdoc, but we'll kind of talk about that later. So that's just kind of the hopping all over the country, all these big arrows, kind of all the roads I've been. I kind of wanted to really focus in on my postdoctoral fellowship. That's what I feel like many of you are right now. And you can probably see this road path here. You know, this is expected career path. And I've seen this in a lot of the other presenters' talks. So kind of drilling it in that this is what I expected when I entered my postdoc. here I was on my nice bicycle at the College of Medicine. Here are kind of the boxes I needed to check to get to that faculty position. I kind of saw myself at a middle of the road, maybe a little smaller liberal arts school where I could still do research, and here we go. So I started my postdoc. I got postdoctoral funding. I was really lucky. I got an amazing grant from the Science Foundation of Arizona that funded me for 2 years, $200,000, paid for all my experiments. So I had my own funding, started racking up some publications. Here you can see at the bottom here, I was excited to talk to researchers so I could talk a little bit about my science and my postdoc. So what I was looking at were immediate early genes that were implicated in schizophrenia, been found to have some single nucleotide polymorphism, some deficit, some deviations in patients with schizophrenia. And so what I would do I was actually sleep depriving them. I was really interested in sleep and mental illness also. So I would sleep deprive them, and then I would see this immediate uptick in the immediate early genes, and then farther down the mRNA, and actually a receptor that we know is critical for antipsychotic efficacy. So I was kind of putting together this pathway, this intracellular pathway, and I was able to do that in mice. And then I started looking in humans, looking at specific genetic abnormalities in patients with schizophrenia. At the same time, I was working with an early psychosis clinic. So research was just chugging along, doing really well. I was really happy. Started getting some pretty good publications. I started getting some awards. I was getting travel awards. Here I have the International Society for Serotonin Research. It used to be called the Serotonin Club, and I got invited to come and speak, and it was a serotonin safari, which I highly recommend if anyone wants to go on a safari. A serotonin one is a really good one. But I went there and presented in South Africa. So things were chugging along just fine. And then it started becoming about to the third year of my postdoc. I was even doing kind of my own research, looking at sleep again. And so I started putting out grant applications, and I don't want to bore you with the long and the short of it, but my publications were okay, but I was missing a gap of publications from my doctoral studies. They weren't getting published, and we don't need to go into the nitty gritty of that, but it was a deficit in behavioral neuroscience, the field I'm in, and neuroscience. It's competitive. There was a lot of us out there, and grant money is competitive. The National Institute of Health, especially the NIMH, with funding percentage was pretty low. So I wasn't getting grants funded for kind of those kangaroo or those K99 grants. I wasn't really competitive. But I thought, well, let's just start applying for faculty positions. So I applied for a faculty position, just a couple, but I applied for one at my old alma mater, ETSU. And I found out that I had a connection there. My old advisor was still there. And I found out I was in the top 3, but I know the person that got the position, he's super happy there. He had a science publication, and I just didn't have that caliber. So there were challenges that were happening. And so it came to kind of a fork in the road, and it kind of made me start thinking. This little cloud came up. I don't want to call it a storm cloud. It was just a cloud that kind of said to me, is this your path? Is this what you want to continue on? And I think I could have continued on possibly, maybe another postdoc, which is very much becoming the norm, especially in neuroscience. You do 2, maybe 3 postdocs before you start looking at faculty positions, or maybe is there a different route? And this really was a conundrum at the time that I was having. So I had to take a step back. And when I took a step back, I kind of started looking at my career as a whole and what kind of skills and experiences I had gathered through the years, just not my publications, which I feel like you get so publication focused, or my grants, or, my degrees. I started looking at kind of my experience as a whole. And you can see here, I believed I had a specific diversity of mental health and schizophrenia experience. I started realizing this was really my passion. I had never really deviated. I had chances to deviate from this kind of track, and I never really did. So I started in college. I was working at schizophrenia group home. Through my social work, I work with children and families with a lot of mental illness. My research had been preclinical rodent models, genetic knockout. I worked with clinical patients with schizophrenia. I had my education. I also had teaching. I love teaching. My mom just retired with 35 years of teaching kindergartners, which are a little different, but I do love educating, and I would always take adjunct faculty positions. honestly, just for the experience and just for something different whenever I could. And I also work with some patient advocacy groups out in schizophrenia. I would sit in on early psychosis patients, their family members. And if you ever get the chance, if you're ever in kind of one of those disease states, I just highly recommend it, because you kind of step out from behind the bench and you're kind of able to see what your research, you know, what it means in the real world, you know, kind of step outside of the nucleus accumbens of a rat for once and kind of see what does schizophrenia look like in patients and out in the real world. So I started kind of seeing this was my passion, you know, this is what I had kind of stuck with. So my expected career path went a little different. So on the top, you can kind of see what I was chugging away for, what I'd been working for. And this is actually what ended up happening. So, I mean, spoiler alert, you guys know that I didn't get a faculty position. I didn't no longer pursue that route. And things took a little bit of a detour, I'd like to say. So in 2016, I was doing my postdoc. I stopped my postdoc. The funding ran out. I think the straw that broke the camel's back was I was asked to start writing grants for aging. At that time, Alzheimer's disease had become, a lot of money had gone to the NIA, National Institute of Aging. And so my advisor asked me to write that grant. And I was on Wikipedia looking up the research in that field, because that wasn't my passion. I didn't have that breadth of knowledge. And I was just like, I can't do this. I can't write a grant for something I don't know and I'm not passionate about. So someone else is doing much better research in that field. So I went back and did adjunct faculty. As you know, adjunct faculty doesn't pay much. You can't really even get health insurance, but I found a way to do it, and it kind of filled that need to go back to education. At the time, I also kind of found some spirituality. I suffered from a lot of anxiety and stress at the time, which I'm sure a lot of you might be doing. You know, graduate school is a tough time. So I actually became a yoga instructor. And then I started opening myself back up to getting back into research. I always loved research. I'm always interested in research and just the continuation of learning. And so I took a position as a clinical research manager with the All of Us research project, and it was looking at precision medicine. But the nice part was it was already, the protocol and everything was guided by the NIH. So it wasn't my job to do that protocol. It was more just executive, but I got some really good managerial experience. And so while I was doing that all, and I'll talk about this more in my transition to becoming an MSL, I was putting out feelers, taking interviews, and then finally in 2018, I accepted a position as a medical science liaison. And so that's kind of, and that brings us up to the current point of 2020. And then you can see later on, I have a question mark because it's always evolving. We don't know what's going to happen. Hopefully it's not a storm cloud like we see here, but so I'm going to take a brief detour because I'm shouting out MSL and these acronyms at you. And I want to explain to you, many of you might not be familiar about what is an MSL. I know my advisor, she was a brilliant woman, MD, Ph.D, psychiatrist. When I told her I got a position as an MSL, she said, MS what? So it's not widely known if you're, especially in academia, I feel like. So MSLs were first established in 1967. It was actually Upjohn Pharmaceuticals. So it's kind of a newer role, newer-ish. And there's a couple roles for the MSLs, but they're used widely by a lot of different pharmaceutical or even biodevice companies, medical devices. But the first one is to ensure that the products are used effectively, safely. You're kind of out in the field for that product. You're also the scientific peer and resource within the medical community. So that's why I say like in the field employees. So my territory you'll see here is South Florida. So any healthcare provider that has a question or wants more scientific information, they're going to call on me. And then finally, facing internally, you're the scientific expert to internal colleagues at the company. So anyone, let's say from legal that might have a question or other departments, you're the scientific expert. And finally, the primary purpose is to establish and maintain the relationships. It's a lot of relationship building with leading physicians, referred to as KOLs or key opinion leaders. You might also hear them as thought leaders. So these are, they're mainly at major academic institutions and clinics. So these can be healthcare providers, so MDs, but they can also be PhDs. But what sets them apart from just other doctors is that this is a person, a he or she, that people are going to get their information. You know, what antipsychotic should I be using? What is the newest product out in the field? These are kind of the leaders that others are looking to. Now in the time we're using it, it's kind of like an influencer, but they were influencers back in the day. And then here on the right-hand side, you can see other titles for medical science liaison. Companies like inventing new titles, but in the United States, it's mainly going to be medical science liaison. This is just some more information for you also. So who are medical science liaisons? The graph, the pie chart that you see, that's actually international. Its main two groups that you're going to see are PhDs and PharmDs. So you can see here, PhDs slightly outnumber PharmDs internationally, about 27%. Over here on the left-hand side, you can see who they are in the United States. All this information, the citations below, is pulled from the Medical Science Liaison Society, and they do a really great survey every year. So this data is pretty new, 2019. So you can see here that as far as education-wise, PharmDs are about 40%, where PhDs are 37%. And that number has always been changing. In the early days, it was almost strictly PharmDs. They really didn't bring in PhDs, but now they're bringing in more and more. And I can say this is reflected on our team of about 30 MSLs. More PhDs are coming in. And I can tell you some of the skills that I think employers are looking to PhDs that we have that we can kind of bring to the table. You can see they're mostly female. That bounces back and forth. Here's also the top areas they work in. And so the top one is oncology. And I can say that oncology, if you have any type of cancer research, they're always looking. I'm always getting recruiter calls about oncology. It's not a space I feel comfortable going into, but if you have any expertise in that, they're always looking for oncology. You have CNS and neuroscience. That's kind of where I'm at. Rare orphan diseases, too, are another kind of bracket. I would say with the rare orphan diseases, I take those phone calls and I look at those positions, mainly looking at mechanism, correct? So if, for example, I know what G protein, you know, what a receptor can do at a specific mechanism, if that product or that therapy, you know, works on that, you know, that might be something of interest, even though it's a very small population. There's a lot of rare diseases. Companies make a lot of money on rare diseases. And here you can see the average base salary, 167, it's pretty attractive too. And then where they work, the majority, of course, in the large pharmaceuticals, you have medium and small. Alkermes, where I work, is kind of on the verge of the small to the medium. And then there's different pluses and minuses of those too. I can only speak from my experience, and this has been my only MSL position. But the good thing about being a small to medium is you have more contact with kind of those internal colleagues. There's also more role for upward mobility as far as your professional advancement. At the larger pharmaceuticals, you have a little smaller kind of disease portfolio, possibly. And so there's pluses and minuses of both, but I would say explore them all. So kind of going back to our road analogy, going back to my story, this is specifically how I transitioned into industry. The big catch-22 and a frustration about getting an MSL position is that you'll see these listings and they say they want 1 to 2 years of MSL experience. And then the other question is, well, how do you get that experience? And the answer is you have to convince someone to give you a chance. They want people with experience, so you've got to get that foot in the door. And it's not a fast process. So this is just kind of my experience here. It took me about 4 years to get the MSL position. I started taking calls, talking to recruiters my first year of my postdoc, because I was just kind of open. I didn't see the harm in doing that. I wasn't actively looking because, again, that first year, I still thought maybe I would get a faculty position. So I just took those calls and kept myself open. I also had 2 very close personal friends that were MSLs. And I would talk to them and they kept encouraging me that this might be something that I would be good at. It's a lot of talking, a lot of education. And so they really encouraged me. And I leveraged a lot of my relationships with them to get into the roles. And eventually one of them paid off with the current role I have. I talked to probably over 20 recruiters, and we'll talk about recruiters. I mean, I can talk about them now. So recruiters will call you, and kind of the idea of headhunters. Some people have different views about recruiters. You can apply directly to companies. I like using the recruiters because I took it as an opportunity to always be refining myself, and they give you feedback, they talk about your resume, and they can just maybe get you in front of more people. So I always took a call with a recruiter. I still take calls with recruiters if it's something I think would interest me. I also had about 6 in-person interviews. So there's different types. So I want to talk about contract versus permanent employees. There's some companies out there, for example, the medical TMAC is called the Medical Affairs. And so the Medical Affairs Company. And so what they do is they work as a contractor, and that's a good first step if you're just trying to get your foot into the door. So the idea is that they kind of vet you, they practice on with you with interviews, and then they might get you out to a company that's not willing to hire you on as a permanent employee because they might not need a team for that long, or they don't know how big their team is going to be, their MSL team that they're doing for their product launch, for example. But they can, if you do well and they like you, then they can kind of what they call absorb you into the company. And I've had a couple good MSL friends, and that's how they got their foot in the door. So I think it's a good opportunity, and I personally wouldn't turn that down. I also interviewed with 3 different companies, and that led me to my current MSL position. So my current MSL position is down here in South Florida. That's how I met all the great people at Florida Atlantic. And so what it's looking at is my therapeutic areas with Alkermes are schizophrenia, bipolar, addiction, and the addiction looking at, we work with opioid use disorder and alcohol use disorder. So I support 2 products right now, and that's kind of, we're called portfolio trained, and that's kind of average for a small to middle. When you get up into bigger companies, it might just be 1 product, or you might hear the CNS portfolio or maybe oncology portfolio, and you kind of call on these centers of excellence, and they're not all listed here, but these are kind of the main hubs that I kind of go out to, and I'll explain that more in kind of the roles of an MSL here. So what is a day in the life of an MSL? And this varies greatly between different companies, different areas, different regions, but this is kind of just my day in the life. A lot of engaging of those external stakeholders, so those key opinion leaders, those kind of big, we call them kind of bigger players in the area. So reaching out to them a lot of healthcare providers, maybe they have questions, they want to see additional data. What does this look like? What does the struggle look like in this population? Responding to those. You're also the representative in the field. So sales team also might call on you to kind of put in a request for you to go out and talk. And also researchers. That's how I met Lorena through Dr. Blakely's lab. I was down there, my role was to kind of find out what research is happening in South Florida and also maybe some opportunities. I think it's best described as this 2-way road. So for example, road going out into the field, so kind of going from Alkermes out to South Florida is all the newest data we have, any new studies we've done. If we're launching a new product, we want to get that out to our thought leaders and to our healthcare providers. But then there's a road going back. So I want to let them know, hey, this is some really great research that's happening in South Florida we need to be aware of. And that kind of leads nicely into, you know, the grants department. I love working with our grants department. And this is something, I mean, take from it with you. I wish I knew this when I was doing my postdoc. A lot of pharmaceuticals have these pots of money that is specifically earmarked for, we call it ISS or ITT, investigator-sponsored studies that are specifically out in the field. There's studies that we can't do internally, so we want to do them externally. And that's a great way to get some funding, and we have some different types of mechanisms for that. So I would look into those if you're always looking for money. Well, I always wanted to talk. Also, our government and policy, we work a lot with those, and our sales team, we work with them, but in a compliantly, we're completely separate from sales. We're unbiased scientific information, and so we're not influenced by sales. And then also you want to maintain your MSL expertise. We go to a lot of conferences, and you can kind of see this on the next slide. This was, again, the survey done. This was done in 2018. You can see attending medical conferences was number 1. And then that KOL relationship, you can see some of the other activities of an MSL. It's very diverse, and it can vary very much from different times of week. The good thing is that no day looks the same. A big expectation is traveling. You can see the asterisk there. That was pre-COVID. Now everything's done virtually. I think at Alkermes, we've made a nice transition over to virtual, but this is kind of exercise I did looking at all the different places I went just last year. So you can see a lot of travel is done. You're about 3 to 4 days in the field, mainly thought leader meetings, going to a lot of conferences, trainings, company. So you do have to like to travel a lot, but we'll see what that's going to look like in 2021. So just some overview highlights of the MSL position. Obviously, the compensation is attractive, travel, pre-COVID. You are always learning, you're always teaching. You still have a pulse on research. I still set up site initiation visits with our clinical trial sites. So I get to talk to them about what they're doing and kind of review protocols. You make your own schedule, which I know being graduate school postdoc, that's what we're used to. A lot of flexibility. And then finally, I think that's where my passion is. I think this does help patients with schizophrenia and also patients with addiction. Here, this is just taking a step back now from the MSL role. We're kind of housed in medical affairs. So there's a lot of different roles. I wish I had known about some of these roles when I was in my postdoc. Mainly, I want to focus on medical information. So this is like medical writers, you might have heard that. The scientific education, so educating the MSLs. We get trained. I was just off a training call today about different disease state. So that's another chance for PhDs, postdocs. You know, if you don't want all this constant interaction with the thought leaders, you can do a lot of good things in-house and you have the skills. And then here on the right, you can kind of see how medical affairs kind of sit. Sometimes we work closely, of course, with government strategy, data generation, and then you can kind of see where the MSL fits. And that's all governed by compliance. So I do want to point that out. That's somewhat difficult sometimes for a PhD. I think about when I was at conferences, I spoke freely as Amanda Maple. Here I am, here's my thoughts on my data. Hey, you know, I'm thinking about like SFN, Society for Neuroscience conference. I would just speak, but when you go out as a MSL, speaking for a company, you can't speak as freely. You really have to think about compliance and what you're allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say. So it's a little bit of a learning curve, but you pretty well know those guardrails. And then this is just kind of where medical affairs sits within all these different, and again, these departments can vary so much and be all over the place, but I was just thinking as far as a postdoc coming from a bench, coming from where I was, medical affairs is definitely a place. And I know on some of your previous talks, they pointed out, of course, research and development. I've had the opportunity to meet with some of our R&D or research and development people, and very similar background to me. I could have easily have stepped in. I talked to them why they love it, because they're doing research. They're still able to think about, you know, design their experiments, but it is governed. Instead of you being self-governed, it is governed by kind of the needs of the company or the drug you're working on. But preclinical, my good friend Jacoby, he's doing rat research at Alkermes, mice research, so very similar to what we're used to. Okay, Lorena, this might be a good time. We can take maybe a couple of questions. If anyone has some questions about all the information I dumped on them.
So, you know, as a lot of us, one of the questions, as a lot of us are used to do our own research, have our projects, and that often gives like sort of a sense of purpose almost. A lot of people is afraid to miss that when they leave academia and move to the industry. So what would you think, it's kind of a 2-in-1 question here. What would you say are the most gratifying moments that you have in your job? And on the other side, what do you miss? Would you say you miss the most about academia?
All right, great. I had to jot this down. So what I definitely miss is what you talked about, kind of, I think the creativity a little bit of like sitting there, you know, we go to conferences still, and I find myself like sitting in a conference and being like, I'm gonna go do that experiment, right? Like, oh, I could see where you could take that. And so that's a little bit, but then I kind of think back, you're still, even in academia, you're still governed by funds, right? So even though I would go to, you go to conferences, you get all inspired, like, I'm going to go back and do this, this, and this, but you're still governed by kind of your resources at the time. So I would say I do miss that. I do miss the creative, like making PowerPoint presentations, for example. We don't make our PowerPoint presentations. They're all made for us. And so being able, it's a little hard sometimes to tell a story when someone else has made it and you're kind of like, oh, this is a redundant slider. I wouldn't have done that. So I think I do miss those kind of aspects. But on the other side, that creativity, I kind of use that instead on how am I going to educate? Like, yes, I have this clunky slide maybe that I didn't make, but I can still tell a really interesting story with it. And I can still learn things. I think the parts that are rewarding is when I really get to educate a doctor that has no idea. Like, why would what does this PK modeling mean? And I don't understand it. And this rep just told me this, and I can be like, oh, okay, here's an opportunity. Let's talk about it. And when I get real insights from them, that's a big part. We pool insights, like, hey, this is really happening in my patient. And I can take that back. And then I think the most rewarding part is when I get a call later down the road. They're like, oh, hey, I used that. I thought about that study you showed me, and I used that in my practice. And this patient's doing awesome. Like that's really rewarding. You kind of get that feedback. It's a little delayed from teaching. You get one-on-one a lot of times, but it's still really nice when you think you've actually done something really good out there in the field.
So also you have showed us very nicely of these different positions and different areas within the pharmaceutical industry, kind of a typical structure. So one of the question is, what does the career progression for an MSL look like? Do people typically, once they get this position, do they stay and it's kind of like an endpoint already? Or do you do you usually move to other positions within either that same company or another company, but moving on from an MSL?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So people do both. I've seen some people pretty senior that just like being an MSL. They like being in the field. They like having their autonomy. And then you have those people that want to move up the career ladder. So for example, from an MSL, in our company, you kind of become an MSL manager. So then you would have other MSLs under you. And so you can do that. And then you kind of can go either farther up into medical affairs, senior leadership is what we call them, when you're looking at maybe different groups of MSLs and leading them. I've seen also a lot of people are interested about going internal over to medical information. They get older and they're kind of like, I'm done being on a plane. I'm over all these dinners and being out late, I want to go and just maybe do science writing. And that's really easy to transition that career too. And it's something I should mention. I did mention people do hop around to different companies a lot as an MSL. An average, I'm sure there's a statistic, but what I've been seeing is 3 to 5 years at one company. And that's because right now there's 6,000 open MSL positions. So bouncing around is a good way to diversify yourself and to get more experience. So a lot of people do bounce around and try to leverage yourself also upwards that career ladder.
Okay, got it. Since you mentioned the travel aspect, do you think that after this year with the COVID-19 pandemic and everything just moving into a virtual format, do you think that will permanently impact all the travel that was required for MSLs, or do you think the companies are just dying to go back to the way it used to be?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. I thought about that when I was making this, and what we've been hearing a lot from our thought leaders is kind of like the genie's out of the bottle. If you don't, and the amount of money companies spend on sending us everywhere, and all of our mileage and our expense cards and everything, they're saving that right now. And you can be so much more efficient, scheduling meetings. When I used to go down in person to Miami, I could maybe schedule 2 meetings, maybe 3 in a day. And that would be a long day traveling, but now you can do it so much more efficiently. So to answer your question, they're trying to get data, but I think it's definitely going to be a hybrid. Some old school thought leaders still like the in-person. They want to go to dinner and they want to talk and they want to be in person. I think that's a value we bring, but I feel like they're realizing, wow, we can get a lot done virtually at a lot lower price. So I think it'll be a hybrid. That's my guess. That's totally Amanda Maple.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. All right, well, I'm going to let you continue and then we'll go back to the questions afterwards.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, so this is just some of my tips for the road ahead. Here you can see this comic I just thought was so telling. This man walking into like a Best Buy saying, I like the way my GPS lady gives me driving advice. Is there another one that can give me advice about everything else? I wish I had that almost every morning kind of to tell you. So this is just some tips that I've kind of pulled out. A lot of people, again, that catch-22 of, well, I don't have any MSL experience, but actually looking back kind of retrospectively, we all do have a lot of these MSL skills that you've already done throughout your PhD or postdoc work. So for example, knowledge of your therapeutic area, you have so much research experience, your training, your knowledge, your education, critical thinking, so problem solving, everything goes wrong in research, right? So being able to think on your toes, problem solving, developing protocols, your experimental design and understanding that. Also, I didn't put up here, but statistics. The PhDs, we usually are always speaking up on statistics when we're talking about research. Teamwork, so finding and maintaining this successful collaborations. I remember I was interviewing, I really touted how much collaborations I had. And I know in research now, you live and die by your number of collaborations. So that's definitely something to bring to the forefront. Also your projects, presentations, you work on that in a group, you don't work on that out bubble anymore. And then relationship building, mentoring students, my CV, which I'll discuss in a couple slides, but I always brought that up, how many graduate students I had mentored, undergraduates, medical students. I also made some collaborations between some different other faculty members, maybe. So I brought that up. Dissemination of knowledge, teaching assistant, graduate assistant, adjunct faculty, all your research presentations, that's all disseminating knowledge and taking it out there. And that's a big key point of being an MSL. Acquiring information, any information that you taught yourself, you had to go learn a whole book on how this machine works and you had to figure all that out. That's valuable information. Then being a self-starter, saying that you go out and learn and you push it. You weren't asked to do it, you went on your own. I mean, these are all things that you all probably do every day. It's just nice to pull them out. This is just diversity of experience. You want to set yourself apart. I mean, I'm sure this is just old news, but I always think about this. You know, what's going to set me apart? What's going to make me a little different? Everyone's got the degrees. And for me, it was my path, especially with mental health. I mentioned this before, but take every call, every opportunity is a way to refine your skills and kind of talk through what you want. And then those recruiters, a lot of people I know on another call have some mixed feelings about recruiters. If you're in the point where you're just trying to get your foot into the door and try to get every opportunity, I took every call. I think it's just a way to practice. And the more connections you can make, the better. And also experiences don't have to be paid positions. I mentioned how I worked with advocacy groups. I mean, I put that on my resume, and that's not something I paid for. It was volunteer work, and you probably also have a lot of volunteer work. So those are also valuable experiences. Networking. I feel like this is such a hot topic, and networking, but it drives me a little bit of anxiety. Networking it can be a little anxiety provoking when you're at a conference like networking happy hour and you think about, I just have to go and talk to random people, you know, and for speaking to someone in my role, that's kind of weird, but it's intimidating. So I think when you think about networking, take a step back. And there's so many easy ways to network. So for example, you just want to keep in contact with your past advisors, collaborators, mentors, mentees, especially in this age. It's so easy just to send them a text, send them an email. Hey, Dr. Brown, how are you doing? How's everything in the lab going? You know, I'm out here looking for jobs. Maybe do you know anyone? You know, like that's just a nice way to keep that bridge up there, and you'll be amazed about what will come out. For example, when I applied for this position with Alkermes, I shot my old advisor an email, said, hey, yeah, like, how are you doing? Things are going good. I'm actually interviewing for this company. He's like, oh yeah, I know an MSL. I had no idea he knew another MSL. He's like, well, she can help you out if you need it. And I thankfully didn't need it, but it's just keeping those bridges, you know, up and working and that good relationship. Leverage your current relationships with any friends, anyone in the field. Always want to use that. Ask for any connections, obviously. It may come to a point where you need to do a cold call, you know, or message or email someone on LinkedIn. I definitely advocate for that. The worst that, this is a saying from my mother, but the worst they can tell you is no, they don't respond. And then that's really not that bad. But if they do get a response, and I know if they're like me, you feel the need, you want to help out anyone you possibly can because someone, lent me a lending hand, find some commonalities with them. You find out, hey, they went to school in Arizona, or, maybe they have this on their LinkedIn that they're following Bill Gates. You like Bill Gates? I mean, whatever kind of common denominator you can find, but make it, you have a clear purpose, and also be direct and concise, be short about it. I used to think it was just kind of messed up. The longer I could keep someone on the phone, I used to think that's how successful I was. But no one has time for an hour-long call, especially in this day and age. So just be concise, 10, 15 minutes. Thank you for your time. I'd love to follow up with you, but you want to be respectful of their time. Resumes. I don't want to go in deep to this. You can pay people to look at your resumes, make your resumes. But if you were probably in the boat I was, you didn't have that type of money for resumes. And here's just a Google image of all the different types of resumes. But I just want to say, as resumes, hopefully this is not your first contact. When you just throw your resume into the giant pot or the giant pile at whatever pharmaceutical company, you're just in there. It's best to make that in-person connection beforehand with anyone that works at the company. So you can put that in your cover letter. Oh, I've talked to one of your MSLs, John Smith, and he said this is a great company to work for. It shows that you've just kind of done that little extra legwork. You can also get employee referrals. So employees, we get incentives a lot of the times. Hey, if we refer a really good candidate, then we can get, maybe some money if they get hired. And so employees are looking to refer other people. Also, CV versus a resume, I don't need to go in depth with that, but shorter is always better. My first CV was 15 pages. No HR person is going to sit and look at 15 pages. And looking back, I just want to go slap Amanda 3 years ago. Now it's 2 pages. That's what people have time for. And then this is also like what's hiding in your resume. So at the top here, these are actually pulled from my old resumes, my old CVs. So at the top, my first thing I had was my education and training. I just thought that was so important. Here's my postdoc, here's my Ph.D., here's my master's. A lot of people have that. That's still on my resume, but I bumped it down. And instead, I actually pulled this from a good friend of mine. Have a summary statement. This is the highlight. This is what's hiding, that you're not going to see from my education and my publication list. What you're good at, how you checked all these boxes. He has a really great summary statement. And then finally, your publication information. I keep my publications, anything related to schizophrenia or sleep disorder. But here you can see one of my publications. It's a great publication, and it's European Journal of Neuroscience, one of my higher impact ones. But it sounds like gobbledygook to anyone that's not in this field or doesn't know kind of what's going on. So instead, what's really nice, you can put a Google Scholar link. They can just hit that. Nowadays, everyone's on their phone or iPad anyways. Nice, easy way. Interviewing, real briefly, typical interview, it's a marathon, not a sprint. It's usually an all day. You do a presentation, then you go through different types of interviews. So just a heads up, and you'll be pretty familiar with that. Know the company, know the information. A good tip is go to the information for investors page. I used to get really tied up into the mechanisms of the drugs because I thought that would make me sound smart, but it's actually kind of what's going on in the company as overall, what new drugs are coming up, and also what new studies and all that good stuff. That's for investors, and that's an easy way to find the information on their website page. Think about your interviewing experience. You've interviewed people, so it's a good way to kind of think back what they need. The flame challenge, you should be able to explain it to an 11-year-old. I think about that with anything with science. If an 11-year-old really can't understand it, then I need to kind of break it down. When you get real convoluted and it just doesn't make sense. And then always ask for feedback. Here's the flame challenge. This is a great resource, the Alan Alda Center for Communications. It's really great. Any type of science, how to communicate science effectively. So I really advocate using that. And then finally here, just reevaluate your purpose. I unfortunately was forced to kind of take a step back and see, hey, what really matters and what do you want? That work-life balance, which I understand is a joke. When I was in my postdoc, there was no work-life balance. It was work, and then I got a break sometimes. But that became a lot more important to me as I got older. Redirection is not failure. Also comparing yourself to others. I think I heard on one of the calls, you're always like, how many publications do you have? What grants did you get? What this? And that would take me down some dark places. And so I just think everyone has their own path, and you just think about that, and also think that, just because you don't get a job or anything, it's not that you were wrong, you're not smart enough or you're not good enough. It's just, hey, that wasn't my right path right now. And that's the way, like me and a couple other friends, when we're interviewing, that's what we say. It's just not our path. And when you move on. And then what's the point if you're not having fun? You need to have fun. You need to find some enjoyment out of it, or there's really no purpose. So always step back and evaluate. Here's Maslow's hierarchy. Here's some additional resources. The MSL Society I mentioned, the Medical Affairs Professional Society, Cheeky Science Scientists. I've had some friends that use that. A lot of these are paid but you can get a lot of free information. They're always trying to recruit, so you can get a lot of good free webinars. And also I advocate for your university alumni network. And then finally, wrapping this up, we've got 5 minutes left. We got a COVID puppy. And so this is another thing. I wish I had taken better care of my mental health in my postdoc and graduate years. And so we got a puppy, and I just learned so much from her. So hydrate, read, get outside, exercise, and then always look forward to tomorrow. So I've been learning a lot from her. A lot I should have learned about 6 years ago. So, and then finally, embrace the detour. It's all a journey. If I can leave you with anything, just your path is special and it's there for a reason. So just roll with it. And that's it. So Lorena, if there are any final questions, I think we got about 6 minutes left.
Adorable pictures. Love it.
I've been using that dog for so much.
Okay, we do have a couple of questions here. One of the questions is if there is a course specific for being an MSL or to gaining an experience, and if not, what kind of activities would you recommend that could make your CV a bit more attractive to get one of those positions?
Mm-hmm. So the MSL Society actually does offer certification. However, they want you to have a year experience. So it's, again, that catch-22, right? Well, I don't have any experience. What I would really recommend is diversifying and getting, if you're super preclinical, like I kind of was, getting any type of clinical research experience is really good. So I did clinical trials, anything that can kind of be clinical or even related to pharmaceuticals, if you're going for the pharmaceutical route. So maybe trying to, get one of these grants that the pharmaceuticals are working out, any type of connection. I would say any type of clinical trial, any type of clinical research is definitely help.
Another question too is about the interaction with the physicians or with the medical doctors. A lot of us during our PhDs, we don't have much contact with a lot of the clinical people if you're working with preclinical. How is that? Does that usually go? And is it a positive experience? Do you feel respected and appreciated for your information, or is it very challenging?
That's a really good, another good question. So when I speak to PhDs, I feel like, oh, you're speaking my language. Like we talk really easy. When talking to MDs, it's different. There's an ego in the room. And so you kind of have to be aware of that. Like coming from a PhD, like we can want to talk about certain things. It's really going back to that scientific communication. You really have to think about what they're thinking about. And what I've learned through the years is kind of where are they coming from. So for example, some MDs like to talk about mechanism and they want to talk about your clinical studies. Some MDs are just like, my patients can't get this drug. They're worried about, kind of access questions. So I think the thing is you really have to find out where they're coming from, and they're so diverse. So they're, and so I think that's been like a bit of a learning curve, but that's very true. At first, it was, and some just don't have time for you. So, and you have to be okay with rejection. Not everyone wants to meet with you, and you're not going to match with everyone, so it's just trying to like bring as much as you can to the table. And then also kind of being respectful. So yeah, I think I've also learned a lot about rejection, not taking it personally. Like they don't respond to me, it's okay. They don't dislike me fundamentally as a person.
Okay, we got an interesting one. So this role pays substantially more than faculty actually, and does not require there's a couple typos, so I'm kind of confused on what the person asked here. So
it's the end of the day. It's totally understandable.
Yeah. So it pays substantially more, doesn't require something to do with the commitment of the work, probably just the type of work and, the extra hours and that work-life balance that you mentioned. I'm assuming that's what this is relating to. So then why did I become faculty then, if there's this possibility?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, I mean, I still, like, some days I'll still think back and be like, I do have a friend that path, she did it. She went right with me. She's a tenure track faculty at Arizona State. She loves it. She's doing awesome. I think it's that creativity and independence. I mean, I still think about it sometimes too, like, oh, it'd be nice just to go to the mountains and teach at a liberal arts school. Wouldn't that be? You're paying off in different things. I travel a lot. I was gone a lot, and it kind of is that independence. So I wouldn't say one's better than the other. Yeah, to answer their question, yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I think about it too, like, oh, it'd be nice to go back. I miss teaching undergraduates. I miss talking to students definitely too. So I think those interactions too, you kind of miss. And you're kind of governed by a different thing. I'm governed by this company, and this company could go under tomorrow. So that's another thing you have to think about, and you have to, like, that's why I'm always taking calls, because you don't know what the market's going to do or what a drug's going to do. So it's that little bit of uncertainty, but I think we're compensated because of that, So it's always a payoff. But yeah, I feel bad. I want that person to be super happy in their faculty position. There's definitely a lot of people that want to be in those too. So, but we're always hiring MSLs. There's like 6,000 open positions. So if you want to give it a try.
Awesome. There's a master's student asking if you have any advices for master's students that want to potentially go. I guess you mentioned also that, there's a lot of PharmDs and there's PhDs. So any advice that they can, plan ahead if they're still in their master's and, thinking of moving.
Yeah, I mean, if this is a real role, we don't have a lot of masters. I haven't seen, we have some APRNs, so some nursing degrees that come over and do it. If they're in their masters and this is something they really want, either a PhD or a PharmD. Yeah, unfortunately, I haven't seen any masters people get in, but if this is something they really want, the quickest is a Pharm. I've never been a PharmD, but it seems like it'd be a lot less than PhD. But yeah, definitely start planning ahead. And like I said, that clinical research would be really valuable.
Okay. I think that was it for the questions. You had just some comments here, no questions, just love the PowerPoint slides and that you communicate very well, that the presentation was nice and creative.
It was so much fun to make. Yeah, and then always feel free. You guys can find me on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to help out any way I can if you have more questions, or through the FAU. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I hope everyone got a little bit of information out of this and a little distraction on a Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah, for election. No, but we're the ones. We're the ones to thank you. Thank you so much. This was fantastic. It was very rich and very important information that we don't usually get access to, right? I think for a lot of us that are, especially in preclinical research, the industry is really, there's just not, it's kind of a mystery, right? There's not that much that we know about, and at least not often getting that information. So this was great. Thank you so much for agreeing to participate with us. Thanks to everybody that joined us today. I would like also to mention some attendees from our neighbor institutions that have joined us today. Graduate students that are also frequently present in these talks. We're just glad that you're enjoying and keep coming back. So that's great. And I think that's it. We're done with all of our questions. Thanks again, Amanda. Thank you all for your time. And see you next month. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.